Welcome back to Global War 1939. Just finished off round 7. So let's take a look at some of the actions that have taken place. So for the Germans, yes, Moscow has fallen. They went in and actually took out quite a few of the Russians. The Russians were able to fight back quite well, pretty much eliminating every German piece except for their armor corps. So they still got all the tanks that they went in with, but they lost all their infantry, artillery. Outside of the tanks, they only survived with 3 mechanized, SS mechanized. Everything else got destroyed. So now that the fall of Moscow, the only Russian territory left is Stalingrad, which should fall this coming turn. Basically, the stack of armor at this point, they actually got nothing to do here. So they got 3 choices. They can continue on to the Russian second capital and attack them with only armor within two turns to prevent the Russians from building over time and still producing their military. But they actually lose a turn of production because of the fall of Moscow. Or they can send them back to France, go up to Scandinavia to help defend that, but that's a lot of armor for that small region. Or they can send them down south to Iran and the Middle East. So they got some choices to be made here. Outside of that, any other unit that wasn't required in the Battle of Moscow has actually turned around and started heading towards France. And then we did another little build up, some maneuvering around. We got our PK-40s up on the front lines now, as they are much better suited on a defensive role as opposed to attacking. Their die rolls are better on defense. So basically, what's going on here? The border, any territory bordering the Atlantic is lightly garrisoned, 3 infantry, 4 infantry, 6 infantry, and then the bulk of their forces is in Paris itself, which is this card. They got a Tiger tank, a couple Mark 4s, Mark 5s, light tanks, stack infantry, and a few mechs, a couple artillery. So basically, what their intent is, instead of putting a stack of soldiers here, here, and here, lightly garrison, let the Allies capture that territory and then counterattack. So that is the kind of the go-to plan, because from Paris they can counterattack all 3 territories. The only problem with this is if the Allies attack 2 territories at once, which is a strong possibility, then they would have to split this up. That's why they're trying to get as many units back as possible. And then in Western Germany, they do have a fair amount of units. Not a fair amount, but some units. They got 2 SS mechs, 3 medium tanks, 2 artillery, 3 infantry. And then they got some more Mark 4s, infantry. And then they got some troops down in the Baltic states. So we'll see what these guys do. For the Italians, they were in a lot of trouble this turn. So what ended up happening? The British had their fleet here from India. They did come up and capture Greece and these 2 islands for Greece. At the time, the Italian fleet was in Sea Zone 36, too far away to do a counterattack, so they just moved back into Sea Zone 39, built up some units at home, put most of them in their capital, put 2 infantry in the most northern region, and then, of course, put the rest down in Africa. So the British actually came up into Sea Zone 40 and landed in the most northern territory. The Italians had 2 infantry and an air transport, and the British landed with 3 infantry, of course, they got that seaplane and their bombardment, captured it, reducing the production facility down to a minor. Then the Italians had to go in and recapture it off the British, reducing their production facility again. So with this little raid, the British knew that they weren't going to hold this territory. That would be crazy to think that they would. But now the Italian home production facility is now cut in half. So definitely a big deal there. So that is not good. And then they had three of their transports here, and they had one here in Sea Zone 38. The Brazilian and American combined fleet, Sea Zone 35, because they captured Gibraltar, came in, took out the transport in 38, landed a bunch of infantry in this territory here, removing the French Foreign Legion on the Axis side, capturing that territory. And then, of course, the British from Morocco went into northern Algeria. So this side of Africa has been completely cleared of Axis, putting a major amount of pressure on the Italians. The Italians did have most of their group in Upper Egypt, ready to strike into Cairo. However, with this threat coming from the east, or the west, sorry, they actually had to turn around, and now they're in Alexandria. At first, they were calculating the odds of going into Cairo now, even though they weren't ready and prepared. Their transports in the Mediterranean they could have landed 6 more units to help them out, but they needed to recapture Greece. And they recaptured Gibraltar, utilizing all their transports to do that. Even though these 4 territories were all walk-ons, their transports weren't able to help out in Cairo. So instead of attacking and losing their force, like I figured they would, they turned around, freeing up a lot of pressure off the British. So dropping guys here a couple turns ago in Rio de Janeiro is actually paying off quite a bit, and then the Americans are coming in to assist. The Americans did lose 3 infantry in this attack, and of course they lost their fleet because the Italians came in Sea Zone 38 and destroyed their fleet. But then they got the units where they needed, taking another $1 away from the Germans. So this battle group is going to continuously to go east, and then hopefully soon enough the troops in Cairo can push out and eliminate the Italians altogether. That's their plan. And then the British fleet that was in Sea Zone 27, after dropping the guys off in Africa, they came back up to 27. And now they are sitting in Sea Zone. Oh my goodness. Sea Zone 13. So they're all sitting in Sea Zone 13 off the coast of Scotland. They actually have quite a few destinations they could go. They can go land in Oslo and take away 2 bonuses off the Germans, which would be an economic hit for sure. The Germans won't be able to counterattack with the combined Swedish and German fleet. Yes, Sweden is now in the game. After Moscow fell, they activated Sweden right away. And they're actually able to activate Spain, which they probably should have. The Italians probably should have, so we might have to wait another turn. There's no real threat from the Germans losing any cities, so they can delay another turn. If you look at the turn sequence, you're better off getting the Italians to activate Spain as opposed to the Germans. Typically, when the Germans come in, they'll get activated, they'll stand up, everything's good, but they won't get a turn because the British and the Americans usually jump on them very quickly. Portugal will join the Allies, getting a small standing army, and these 2 territories usually get destroyed very quickly, only leaving Madrid left alone. So if you get the Italians to activate them, then at least the Germans have a chance to reinforce them before the British and the Americans attack. But yes, so this fleet they can jump into Oslo, or they can help out the Americans. The Americans did put a lot of money in the transports and into soldiers in the Atlantic, so they can certainly utilize their D-Day capability and land a ton of units. The British can land 20, and the Americans have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 transports, and the British have 10 there and 1 here. So that's a lot of transports, a lot of units getting dumped all at once. So the liberation of Europe has the potential of going off this coming up turn. Certainly too late for the Russians. The Russians wanted to see D-Day 2 turns ago, but the Allies weren't ready. As for India, another build-up, nothing really too crazy. Right now, they are outproducing the Japanese, even though the Japanese did bring down 2 transport loads of equipment and men. The British are still outproducing them. So we'll see how quickly this gets resolved. There is a build-up in China between the Chinese and the Japanese. The Japanese might have the slight advantage here. The Americans weren't able to give them another tank, so they have their 3 tanks right now. So they just got to focus on infantry and holding off the Japanese as long as possible. Hopefully the FEC makes their move before the Chinese do get wiped out. And for over here was quite interesting, the dynamic, how this all played out. The Americans, if you recall a couple turns ago, they did go up to Sea Zone 136, and with a potential landing spot in the Tokyo, pretty much taking Japanese out of the game. So in response to that, the Japanese did build another Amato, 3 more cruisers, and then they sent up a lone cruiser into Sea Zone 135 to be a blocker, because from Sea Zone 136, they have to go through 135 to land in Japan. The closest they could have got was 129, which they would have been ambushed. The Japanese fleet did come up from Sea Zone 90, was it 90? No, 108, and they moved up to 118 to cut off the main American fleet. Even though they were a turn behind, they were kind of out of position down here. But in trying to keep the Americans away from their home island, the Japanese did have a secondary fleet in 95, and 2 infantry and 2 artillery. These guys are dead. So they had 2 infantry and 2 artillery in the Carolina Islands, and they have a dockyard. So they were able to reach Hawaii. They did capture Hawaii. The Americans lost 3 infantry and a medium bomber, and the Japanese lost 2 units. So Hawaii Eyes did fall to the Japanese. The secondary fleet was in Sea Zone 120. So the Americans abandoned their pursuit for Tokyo and recaptured Hawaii, eliminating the Japanese secondary fleet. The only cost to the Americans, they lost a couple torpedo boat destroyers and a couple of destroyers. That battle was actually won in 1 round of combat. The Americans rolled extremely well. The Japanese had a battleship, a carrier, fighters, a couple cruisers, a couple destroyers. So the Americans rolled really well, eliminating the Japanese threat for Hawaii. They did construct another battleship. So will this now be the time for the Japanese to attack? They are certainly within range. This battle will determine the fate of the Atlantic, I have no doubt. Right now, the Japanese have 2 subs, 2 8 destroyers, 2 escort carriers, 3 carriers, 3 Amanos, 2 regular battleships, and 5 cruisers. The Americans have 7 cruisers, 3 carriers with fighters, 4 battleships, and 2 destroyers. So I think this is now the time to strike while they can. These ships won't be able to reach them. However, they do have another task. Because the Japanese secondary fleet went up to Hawaii, their main fleet went towards their home island, leaving this part of the Atlantic wide open with 0 defenses. So the Anzac have been on a kind of a roll here. As you can see, they've taken out 1, 2, 3 islands that the Japanese spent 3 turns trying to capture these off the Dutch. And the Anzacs recapture them for themselves. Their fleet down here in Sea Zone 86 has 3 cruisers, 3 subs, a transport, and 5 destroyers. And then they went ahead and constructed another destroyer and a cruiser. That second destroyer was there already in Sea Zone 99. So definitely quite interesting. The Japanese are going to, they should attack the American fleet. This should be the time to try to take that out. They are also convoying the Americans, and they have another sub-rated convoy. The Japanese sub that was convoying this FEC territory moved out because they seen the Anzac fleet getting pretty close. At the time, it was in Sea Zone 76, so they moved out to try to save the sub, and they'll more likely go into this convoy box, as the British fleet that was here for quite a few turns in 65 has moved into the Mediterranean. So the goal for the Japanese is to take out all 3 of these boxes. But certainly this small Anzac fleet needs to be dealt with first. So the Japanese will build up a small secondary fleet to go after these guys. Yeah, so definitely a lot went on. A couple territories exchanged hands. So we'll see how all this plays out in this coming up turn. So outside of that, there's not really much else. The Americans and the British are now poised to go into Europe. But without the Russian distraction, the German production should be able to focus solely on defending France. The Germans are going to start switching their mindset to their navy. The bolstering of the Swedish Navy did help escalate that quite a bit. They got a transport, another destroyer, and 2 coastal battleships once Sweden joined, and a handful of infantry and artillery. The Germans did produce 2 subs this last turn. So we'll see how the buildup goes. But certainly they do need to get rid of that Russian fleet in Sea Zone 17. And then maybe start the Battle of the Atlantic again. So we'll see how all this plays out. All right. Well, thank you for watching, and have yourself a great day.